Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome back to the Charlie Mike webinar series hosted by the National Veteran Small Business Coalition. Today is part 5 of our 7-part webinar series. I'm Earl Morgan, the NVSBC Program Director, and to our new attendees, thank you for joining us today. And we're stuck. There we go. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this webinar series possible. It skipped. So today's run time is 1 hour. A link to the recording will be posted on the NVSBC webpage. If you have any questions during this presentation, please type it in the text box below. And if we are unable to get to your questions in a lot of time, we'll get the answer for you and post it on the Charlie Mike webpage. Now let me introduce our moderator, the Executive Director for the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, Mr. Scott Jensen.
Hey, thanks, Earl. Once again, we appreciate all your work for our Charlie Mike series and all the work you do for NVSBC and veteran business owners. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure once again to have you here with us this week. We're real honored today to be joined by Guy Timberlake. He's the co-founder and chief visionary officer of the GovCon Club. For over 30 years, go-to Guy Timberlake has been a student and teacher of government contracting. His roots stem from his formative years supporting defense intelligence programs as far back as the first Gulf War. He's recognized as a resource for federal sector business development and competitive intelligence disciplines, and shares that knowledge under the umbrella of ethical stalking for government contractors. With his wife, Margaret, Guy leads GovCon Club, a reimagining of their first successful member community for government and industry. Guy's nickname was given to him by Navy and Air Force customers in the 90s because they could and did rely on him to get the job done. I've enjoyed the last couple of minutes here as we were getting ready to kick things off, visiting with Guy. Guy, it's always a pleasure to have you here. We appreciate what you do for the veteran community, the veteran business community, and really are happy to have you on with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, and the floor is yours, sir.
I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks very much. And for both you and Earl, appreciate you having me here today. And I'm looking forward to hopefully providing some really useful information to the group today.
I'm sure it will be. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Earl, let me see if I've got control here. There we go. Excellent. Thank you, sir. So, folks, hope everyone is doing fantastic today. I love being here today. I do wish I was, however, in these mountains behind me, but, until that time comes, I'm going to hang out with all of you and give you some good information. For those that don't know me, go-to Guy Timberlake. I am, the founder and co-founder, actually, of the American Small Business Coalition. So that was the first organization that my wife and I ran from 2004 till just a couple of years ago. We pivoted recently, opened up the SCIF, and now the GovCon Club. So we have a lot of balls in the air right now, having a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll come and check us out sometime. We have been a longtime supporter of NVSBC since Scott Dennison first whispered in my ear on a conference we were on one day about what he was planning. So it was great to see this come to fruition and see all the great work that's going on here. The conversation I want to have with you today is about a procurement methodology used in federal contracting that is not known to a lot of folks or is overlooked by a lot. And a lot of times that knowledge is based in context. So hopefully when you're through with this today, one of the things you'll have from this is a lot more understanding, but also a tremendous level of context about what it all means and how to put it to use. So 5 things you need to know for finding and winning low-hanging fruit is one of my fun titles I use to talk about simplified acquisitions. It's actually something that is very near and dear to my heart because when these came about in 1994, under FASA, the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, I took some of the first orders from government agencies processing simplified acquisitions under the old or the original thresholds. So, You heard Scott mention this is part of the curriculum that we call Ethical Stalking for Government Contractors. Ethical Stalking is a 11-year-old program, the flagship of which is a 2-day boot camp program, followed by 4 months of group coaching. It is an immersion, literally you think about the fire hose of information that you get, but it's done so in a way so you can come away from it with the nuts and bolts you need to actually get things done. For those of you that are interested in reaching out to me, here's my contact information. This will be in the slide deck that we made available to Earl as well. Feel free to reach out. We're on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, all those places. Give us a call, join me online. Love to hear from you. So a couple of things I want to lead off with before we get into the actual topic today. Business development has evolved over the years, and anyone that's involved in growth for their organization needs to have their head on a swivel. And that swivel includes having an eye for information that may not be directly business development related on first glance, but when you see these, I'm going to share with you, I think you'll agree. Some of these, if not all of them, have an impact on how companies do business in the growth area. So the first one I'm going to lead off with is this. All this information, by the way, is easily found on a blog put up by a law firm we work with. The firm is called Coprince Law. Steve Coprince used to be with Polaro Mazzi years ago, and he retired out to Kansas and formed his own law firm, and he's been doing it ever since. Fantastic job. They are the quintessential, small business, federal contracting law firm. This first one that talks about the Court of Federal Claims is something that every small business should be tuning into. When you think about the pecking order of how agencies do their acquisitions, that order usually starts with going to their hall closet to see if what they need for that requirement is there. And if it's not, then they have to go to the hall closet of their sister agency or the one across the street. And then they get into what's called the required source of supply. That's the Ability One program and the Unicore program, the federal prison industries. And again, those are mandatory sources. They can't sidestep those. The GSA schedule used to be in there. It's no longer required source of supply. But then here's where this rule comes into place. The customary action for most agencies was then to go to established contract vehicles before they would invoke the rule of two to find small business. This ruling basically reverses that. Court of Federal Claims says before you go to an existing contract vehicle, you have to invoke the rule of two. Do your analysis and see if you can go to small business. This potentially throws about $40 billion back into the hopper that is now contestable if this is basically put in action by agencies. Because when you think about opportunities going out to OASIS or some of the GWACs like CIOSB 4 or 3, soon to be 4, or Alliant, those would never hit the street because they would go to those vehicles first. This reverses it. The only one that is exempt from this rule is the GSA schedule, and those GWACs are not schedules. So keep your eye on this one. This is a lot of great information. To get to the website, it is www.smallgovcon.com. All right, here's the next one. One of the updates recently had to do with the 8A program. And so if you were a company that was in the 8A program as of March of last year, you're going to get an automatic extension on the 8A program. Now, that's a big deal because what it does is extends the life for those companies. Some of them may have already expired, or some may have been about to expire. They've gotten an extension. So again, keep an eye on that for as well. One of the ones that Earl and I were talking about the other day, I know there's a lot going on in the veteran community related to this. Congress approved the transfer of the CVE certification programs to SBA. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an expert on this conversation, but I've talked to people who know more than me. Here's what I know. Bottom line, the programs as they were still operate as they did before this came out. The CVE is still there doing its business. SBA is still there doing its business. While the change has been made on paper, implementation has not yet been designed. So they're still trying to figure out money and responsibility and all these things. And I was made aware, talking with Earl and Scott, about an organization that pushed information out about the abolishment of the CVE program. I can tell you hands down, that is not the case. So it's business as usual. And what you're going to wait for is information and updates from the folks at NVSBC or SBA or VA. Anybody else talking, quite honestly, is just noise. This is another one I need you to pay attention to. If you are a small business doing work with a large contractor, large primes, they are now required to give you past performance reviews. This is a big deal because, a lot of them don't do it. They don't want to empower you to compete against them. They want to just empower you to get the job done on their work. And that's not all of them, but it's quite a few. This changes things. And not only do they have to give you past performance reviews, agencies have to consider that information. So this is a tremendous switch. However, the downside of this double-edged sword is, my personal opinion, I think primes are going to be more selective now about those companies that will not be as much of a threat to them on certain business. So keep that in mind. Keep your eyes on this for implementation as well. The last one is past performance as it relates to joint ventures. In years past, JV experience stayed with the JV. Now Congress is saying if you're in a joint venture as a small business, that experience now conveys to the entity that made up that joint venture. This is another way to give you more information, more capabilities, and documented past performance. So these are some of the things we like to bring to folks' attention, because this job is tough as it is. So if you can get those extra sets of eyes and ears to help you out, then leverage them. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you 5 things that I think you want to know about to help you better do business with Uncle Sam as it relates to simplified acquisitions. I'm going to tell you things you need to know, and I'm going to also explain to you the simplified acquisition program and just what has changed with it over the years since 1994 and even in the last 10 years. So the first thing you need to understand, the question you should ask is, based on who my company is, based on what we do for a living, does Uncle Sam buy what we're selling? The short answer is yes. The trick is who, how, and from whom else. The other one is, how do they actually talk about what it is you sell to them? I'm going to pull a little change up here on everyone, so kind of buckle your seatbelts. Here's the deal. The U.S. government uses a number of systems to classify and identify what they're doing. That includes identifying projects and programs using a classification called a UII, Unique Investment Identifier. If you are in the IT world and you don't know what a UII is, you're missing out. All right, and you call me, I'll share the source of where you can see this information. It's on the web and it's a government website, and it is a wealth of information. If you don't understand the hierarchy, the structure of the codes that identify departments and agencies and activities, all right, these are called DODACs. If it's civilian agencies, they refer to them as AACs, activity address codes. The contract numbers, all right, fancy languages, PIID, procurement instrument identifier. If you're an FPDS or data bank, either system, that's the term used to describe it. So if you're creating a report based on the attributes and you don't know that term, you're not going to be able to create the reports you want to get. when you have a GSA or a VA schedule, the way they identify the goods and services, they use SINs, special item numbers. And the point I'm making here is showing you just the number of classifications that are in play right now in the government. And this is just a drop in the bucket. Transactions based on what was bought, object class codes, OCC, ties program dollars to specific buys. And then where the controversy begins, NAICS codes. They describe the purpose for which goods and services that are being bought will be used. These are not the classifications that tell you what the government is buying. Yet most of us use these as a principal criteria, looking for new work or doing market research for historical information. When we talk about goods and services purchased, this is where we get into the PSC codes. This is different. And the long and short of it is, product service codes have been around a lot longer. And I'll talk about those now. So I'm going to focus on, for this first section, what exactly the PSC codes are, how they're used, and what it can mean to you. So if you go to acquisition.gov, you'll find the PSC code manual there. And in that manual put out by GSA, it'll tell you PSC codes are used by agencies on every transaction in FPDS to identify what good or service was purchased. If you compare the granularity of a NAICS code versus a product service code, here's the deal. First and foremost, NAICS codes, they're 6 position codes, and they come in 20 flavors. The first 2 characters of a NAICS code is what is known as the industry sector. These are the 20 industry sectors right here. And in an average year, the US government will reference about 1,200 NAICS codes on the way to obligating $700 billion, give or take, that shows up in FPDS. On the other hand, product service codes, these are 4 position codes, and they are dispersed amongst 114 product and service groups. So automatically, just by looking at it, there's a lot more here. They're more granular. All right, the first 2 columns in the top of the third one, all products, all goods. The last column on the right side, starting with A is R&D. Everything below that is any other service the U.S. government would buy. NAICS codes and PSC codes are not friends. Quite honestly, they don't even like each other, and they serve a different purpose. So when you think about it, in the given fiscal year, I mentioned there's about 1,200 NAICS codes used in a fiscal year. That ratio versus product service codes is 2 to 3 to 1. In other words, there are nearly 3,000 product service codes referenced in the course of a fiscal year, in addition to the 1,200 NAICS codes. I'll show you how that works in a second. The point is, if you do a search based on a NAICS code, the result you're going to see is only going to show you what was purchased under that NAICS, and not because of the NAICS, but in spite of the NAICS code based on the PSC codes. If you reverse it and do a search based on PSC codes, you'll see everything that was purchased regardless of the NAICS code. And so this is one way to look at it. When you look at simplified, purchases made last year under simplified acquisitions, the US government referenced 1,034 NAICS codes on the way to spending $22.7 billion. Okay, and the top 20 of them accounted for $8 billion. Now, this was a partial year. The total spend was $24.7 billion. So there's another $2 billion that wasn't on this original total. But what you're looking at here are the top 20 NAICS codes by spending when the US government used the simplified acquisition procedures. Now, if you take a look at this first one, 336413, other aircraft parts and auxiliary equipment manufacturing, here's the deal. There's 304 product service codes referenced under that NAICS code. So again, if the PSC code is what they bought, do you know if everything bought under that $1 billion is what you sell? Well, here's how you kind of deconstruct that. You go in and you start peeling back the layers of the onion, and you find out of the 114 product and service groups for PSC codes, 56 of them are represented under that NAICS code. 7 of the services groups, including R&D, are referenced. The number 1 PSC code under this NAICS code is airframe structural components. Now look at the total spend. It's just over $1 billion. Look how much number 1 accounts for. Okay, basically a quarter of it. So they spent $750 million on other stuff that was not apparently very closely aligned to the NAICS code. Well, there's a couple reasons for that. If you go look at all the groups I showed you for product service codes, the ones that are not struck through are what the government purchased under that NAICS code. So if you looked at that as a manufacturing NAICS code and said they're going to be buying goods, take a look at that column on the right. If those letters down there are not struck through, they were buying services. All right, and there's a big spend in there. Now, here's how we flip this around. So now we go take a look at the top product service codes being purchased. There were 2,161 product service codes versus 1,000 NAICS codes. And the top 20 are on the screen. I'm going to leave this up for a second. Take a look at the screen, and you know, I know you can't tell me, but just see if you are represented. Your company's offering is represented in what you see on the screen. All right, very rarely is there somebody in the room when I do these live that isn't represented. Now check this out. If I go down here to the number 1 PSC code under the number 1 NAICS code, I find out it was referenced against 35 NAICS codes. So that's 34 others in addition to that one. And it's 4 industry sectors. So it all didn't fall under manufacturing, which is where you would expect to see aircraft, you know, components and aircraft manufacturing showing up. It was also $23 million more here than it was under that first NAICS code. And so what that means is this. If you go search based on your PSC codes that relate to what you do, you're going to find more money. I'm going to show that to you in another way in just a second. But here's the trick. If we go back to that NAICS code list and look at the next NAICS code in there, 541512, Computer System Design Services. So my question for you, I know you can't respond to me, what was the government buying when they referenced the NAICS code for Computer System Design Services? A lot of people say services. It makes sense, it's on the screen. Well, again, there's 134 product service codes referenced under this NAICS code. 16 different product groups and 18 different services groups, including R&D. So think about that. So the description of the NAICS code talks about services, but right here, I'm showing you the government bought products under that code, and they bought services from more groups than just IT. The number 1 PSC code under this IT NAICS code starts with an R. Here's the hint. IT and PSC codes for services starts with D. So the number 1 PSC code is not an IT PSC code. And it accounted for almost 700 million of the spend. Think about that for a second. So this is what it looks like when the government did a purchase under 541512. Anything that's not struck through, they bought something there, products and services. So the point I'm making here is this. When you go look at a NAICS code and you do a search on the old FBO, now contract opportunities, or an FPDS or data bank, NAICS code will show you everything purchased under it. So it becomes less efficient if you are a core services company and you don't sell products, well, you're going to filter through a bunch of product information. I just showed that to you. You can make yourself more efficient by focusing more on exactly what was purchased. Understand what PSC codes are most relevant to what you are selling. Use tools like Easy Search or even Databank to understand how the organizations you want to work with, by department, by agency, or office, when they buy something with the words that you speak about your offering exist, what codes are they referencing? You will detect a trend. Update your SAM profile, update your market research efforts, and you will see a streamline kick in. So that's the way you can understand very quickly how Uncle Sam buys what you sell. So now the next one is this. How do we identify who is buying? Now, is it, a certain contracting office or something else? Well, the other thing you want to think about is this. Are they attached to your customer? If you've never heard the term interagency contracting, this is where one government agency can buy for another one that is not part of their organization. It's like the State Department buying for the Marine Corps when that detail is at an embassy in Kazakhstan. So you need to think about those kinds of things, because the buys coming out for the end user customer you want to support may not be coming out from an organization that they are part of. And so here's the term. We use the term customer very broadly in our industry, but I want to make sure that everyone understands the difference that we use every time we speak. A buyer is a buyer is a buyer. A buyer is an organization that has the ability and the authority based on congressional approval to bind the US government to a contract. That is what a warranted contracting officer does. Customers are different. Customers are the people that submit the requirements, that provide the money, and actually use the goods and services to affect moving closer to achieving a certain mission goal for that agency. And if you don't understand that, it waters down your ability to really find customers and opportunities. So again, contracting organizations, they issue and administer agreements, contracts, and orders. Funding organizations, and I'm talking about FPDS and Databank. If you're looking at that information, a funding organization is the entity that submits purchase requests. Each of these organizations can be distinguished based on information that we can see clearly every day using an identification number. That's the DODAC or the AAC. So when you think about it, here's what it looks like. In fiscal year 2020, before the year was completed, if you don't know, DoD information is delayed by 90 days from public view. So when I built this report, we were still in that 90-day window of being completed. So basically, it wasn't until January 1st that I could go back and get a complete picture of fiscal year 2020, including all of the current DoD spending. So I've got that done, just not in this particular presentation, but again, it's about a $2 billion difference in spending. Last fiscal year, 69 contracting departments. When I say contracting department, I mean HHS, DHS, DoD, organizations at that level. That could also include Smithsonian or SEC or FINRA as well, because that's the top of those organizations. At the same time, there were 85 funding departments. Again, same level, HHS, DHS, DoD, but that disparity tells you that there are more organizations with money to spend than there are organizations either with the authority to buy or exercising their authority to buy. So 85 organizations had money to spend, and they sent it to 69 of their counterparts who could affect the buys. Within those 69 contracting departments, there were 162 contracting agencies. So no longer at the HHS level, we're now at FDA, CBP, and DISA level. All right, think about it. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. They're called departments, but they are agencies of the Department of Defense. So when you're looking at the hierarchy for market research in a tool like FPDS, that's where they fall. Within those 85 funding departments, there were 270 funding agencies. The disparity continues to grow. Hold on to your seats. There were 2,342 contracting offices that obligated $22 billion, $23 billion last fiscal year. This is based on identifying them through their DODAC on the award document. Want to see how many customers there were? Boom, 8,567. Now, I can count them because I can distinguish them from one another. And that's because they have a DODAC also. And that DODAC tells me a lot about them, who they are, where they're located, what they do, who's in the building. If you're not using these in your market research, you're selling yourself short. So when you go in and look at the information based on a contracting organization, this is a quick snapshot. So these are the top 20 of 69 reporting contracting departments. So you get a view there, kind of what it looks like. And now I bring this one up. Here's the top 20 of 85 funding departments. Now, here's some of the differences you might detect. First thing first, if I go right here to where GSA is on the left, notice that their position shifts on the right. Why is that? GSA is famous for spending other people's money. So they spent more money than they actually put up. So that 271 million that they obligated, only 192 of it was actually their money. The difference came from DOD, HHS, other agencies. If you look at the grand total on both of these, you'll notice a difference. On the left, 22.286. On the right, 22.251. What does that mean? It means that contracting departments obligated 35 million more than those same departments funded during that fiscal year. And again, that's interagency contracting. The Air Force did a purchase for agriculture, things like that. If you don't know these exist and don't understand that can happen, you will miss opportunities because you'll never see it. Every fiscal year in the NDAA, DOD puts out a list of other agencies certified to do buys on their behalf. They're broadcasting it for you, letting you know you may not see all the buys coming from us, so check out these other 10, 12 agencies. They're going to handle it for us. Now, here's the other side of it. If I go down to the agency level and I look at the top 20 of 162 contracting agencies, and then compare that to the top 20 of 270 funding agencies, again, some differences you'll see. First and foremost, GSA Federal Acquisition Service is on the bottom of the contracting agency list, but they don't exist on the funding agency list. Why? Because they were spending other people's money. Look at this one. DHA, Defense Health Agency. They funded a lot. They made the list for funding, but they're not on the contracting agency list. Why is that? They sent money to other agencies, probably including GSA, to do buys for them. And that's how it works. So why is this important? Because bottom line, if you don't understand who your customer is using to do their buys, you'll miss the opportunity. And if you don't understand who your buyer, who their customer is, who they're buying for, you may not put in the right language to speak to the customer, because ultimately your customer is the customer and not the buyer. The buyer is part of the customer relationship, but the organization using it is the funding organization. They're paying for it. They wrote the specs. They're the ones that are going to put it in play. Identify your customers by DODACs. Understand what the DODACs are. There's a whole host of resources out there that can help you with this, and then update your market research efforts. I'll show you this one thing real quick as a snapshot from FPDS. If you've ever been to what's called the CAR, this is the Contract Action Report. If you click the view button in FPDS, you'll be taken to a transmittal. It's the information coming directly from the agencies into FPDS. Despite, rumors to the contrary, FPDS is far from dead. It is still the repository, the official source of all this information. They just moved some of the reporting features over to beta.sam. But here's the deal. What I'm going to show you is this. In the car, you'll see information that tells you who bought it. In this case, a contracting office whose DODAC was 47Q FMA, also known as GSA, Federal Acquisition Service, Assisted Acquisition Services, Region 3. That's who did the buy. That's who made the purchase. But if you go down and look at the bottom, you'll notice that not only did the contracting office agency ID change from 4732 to 2100, that's GSA or FAS versus Army, but the funding office ID is different. That number, W5JNQW, anytime you see whiskey at the start of a number, that's Army, stands for warrior, okay? And that was GSA doing a purchase on behalf of NATO Special Operations Headquarters. All right, again, if you don't know these things exist, you'll never see them. They'll just be completely invisible to you. All right, number 3, are you positioned to sell to that customer? And how do you know? And what I'm talking about is based on the type of award instrument they're going to use. Are you prepared to sell to them that way? Well, if you've never looked into the award instruments and understand what they are and what they mean, here you go. Simplified acquisitions are a streamlined acquisition procedure established in 1994. Under FAR Part 13, the U.S. government can do purchases that start with micro purchases, those are the buys, under $10,000. And then between $10,000 and $250,000 are the simplified acquisitions that we all know and love. Now, here's the deal. These are quick turn deals. They can buy these in under 30 days. I've had buys done by the Air Force and the Navy in less than a week. All right, now those were products at the time. They buy services, usually closer to that 30, because they got to do a statement of work. But the whole principle is this. If you don't understand that the fact that most of what you're seeing on a regular basis and purchases coming from the government look like this, it's either FAR subpart 8.4, which is the schedules program, GSA and VA, there's 2 of them, or FAR Part 13, which we're talking about today, simplified acquisitions, or FAR Part 15. That's the big one. Most of the dollars spent on a fiscal year go out via FAR Part 15, contracting by negotiation. Anyone that's curious about schedules, they're great vehicles, very useful, but the collective total spend of the VA and GSA schedules is less than 10% of the overall fiscal spend. Just kind of give you a perspective on that. But here's the deal. SAP buys are reserved for small business concerns. The solicitations that the government uses to buy these are what's known as combined synopsis solicitation. That's where they expedite the purchase. They basically go around the normal procedure of posting their intent to buy something for 15 days, and with a combined synopsis solicitation, they collapse it into one fell swoop. The current threshold for simplified acquisitions is between $10,000 and $250,000, and there are instances when agencies can exceed the standard SAT or simplified acquisition threshold. Here's 2 of the updates I need to make because these just came out in October. So the first one is this. When the contracting officer anticipates that the order they're going to place is going to be entirely or mostly commercial items, that's goods and services, they can go to not $7 million, $7.5 million. That's the update to the NDAA. The other one is when we're in a situation like we are right now with the pandemic, they could go not to 13 million, but now to 15 million under simplified acquisition procedures. So if you go out and look at FPDS and punch in the code P20C, what you will see is every dollar obligated in support of the fight against COVID-19. And in that number, you will see breakouts of spending under simplified acquisitions where they exercise what's called FAR subpart 13.5. That is the exception to go above the 250K threshold, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. So anytime you see a national interest action, Katrina, COVID-19, the tsunami in Japan, things like that, all those national interest actions are situations where that number goes to 15 million. Because the head of an agency can say, we're gonna need to do this and we gotta act quick. And they are not waiting to put out your normal RFP. They're going directly to streamline procedures and getting it done. So here's how it looks. When you wanna see the way an agency moves through that process, it looks like this. This is part of HHS. This is their system that they use. So here's where they start. They first identify a need. That's in the upper left side there. And if it's a service, they write a statement of work. And the first decision point they get to is they determine, is it above or below the micro purchase threshold? And if it is below the threshold, they go straight to the right, they give it to the card holder in their office, and they make the buy. We're done. However, if it is above that threshold, then they've got to enter a procurement. They've got to basically issue an award document. So they put it into their procurement system, and then they get to their next decision. Is it going to be something where someone is willing to write a sole source? If the answer is yes, follow to the right. They prepare the justification. They announce it, not on Fed BizOps. We call it the GPE. Now it's beta.sam. GPE is government point of entry. All right, and that's the official name for what FBO used to be and what beta.sam is now. And they issue the announcement, and if it's greater than $25,000, that's known as the synopsis threshold. That's the level at which something has to get posted on the GPE. Below that, watch what happens. They send it out, they get their quotes, evaluate them, they make an award. Now, if the answer to the sole source question is no, I'm not writing it, they have one final decision to make. Is the value of that order above or below the synopsis threshold? Watch what happens if it's below. You go straight down to no. Watch what they say they do. They solicit 3 small vendors, post the RFQ in a public location. That's usually a court board in the office, or today, a digital bulletin board that they use that is different than Fed BizOps. They get their quotes, they evaluate them, they make the award. However, if the value is above 25 grand, then they go to the left and they post, again, a combined synopsis solicitation on the GPE. Again, today, contract opportunities. Get the quotes, receive from vendors, we're done here. Now, that's what the process looks like. Average life cycle for these products, 30 days or less. And actually, I think they say 15 days now is what they're saying. 30 days, and it's quicker than a schedule buy on average. One of the things I'll mention to you to keep an eye out for also is this. If you guys remember, you folks remember the Section 809 panel of a few years ago, they just got sunsetted last year. This was the group that was looking into creating more efficiencies for DoD in their contracting practices. One of the recommendations that we are hearing murmurs is going to probably get put into effect is raising the synopsis threshold from 25,000 to 75,000. So I want you to go back to where that arrow is leading to and pay attention. If you're a small business and that dollar amount goes to 75,000, you're in the house because they're not posting those on FBO. They're going to call who they know. So this is where having knowledge and relationship with buyers at that level pays off. I got my start this way years ago, doing these kind of buys with the government. It leads you to the bigger opportunities. Now, here's the point, though. Where I'm taking you with all of this is the outcome of this process I just showed you results in the U.S. government issuing an award that looks like one of these. And the way it works is this. What is an award? So an award, by definition, is a contractual instrument that includes transaction information for the purchase of goods and services, and it can be for purchases made against contract vehicles. That's what an IDV is, indefinite delivery vehicle, or it can be for purchases not against an IDV. We call those standalone contracts. I'm going to show you what those are pretty quick here. So the IDVs are the contract vehicles. Now, these are great. People are excited about these, GWACs and MAIDIQs, and there's a new term called Big Mac, which I just think is kind of silly, but that's on them. But the whole point is this: IDVs are vehicles. Some of them can be used to put money directly against. Some of them cannot. And I'll show you what that looks like right here as it relates to simplified acquisitions. So first and foremost, if you take a look at this first term, BOA, a basic ordering agreement. This is a lesser known contract mechanism used by the government that still accounts for tens of billions of dollars every year. BOAs are agreements, just like their cousin, the BPA. And what it means is both of these are agreements versus contracts, which means there's different rules for protesting, because since they're not contracts, you can only protest the contract. So it makes it kind of fun there. You can have orders, delivery orders placed against BOAs, against the BPA. It's called a BPA call tag. They can be either single award or multiple award. And I'll show you the breakdown in dollars in just a few minutes. But these are two of the agreements that the government uses, and they can leverage these instruments to make awards under simplified acquisitions. Then there's the federal supply schedule. Now, just in truth, up front, kind of give away the punchline, schedules are not really used in simplified acquisitions. Why is that? Well, it falls under a different part of the FAR. Schedules are FAR Part 8. Simplified acquisitions are FAR Part 13. Now, where schedules do get used is when agencies create what's called a GSA BPA. That is a BPA formed from a GSA schedule, terms and conditions, but set up by one agency for them to use. All right, so there is spending against those under simplified acquisitions. Now, schedules are multiple award vehicles only. There are no single award schedules. These are government-wide mechanisms, and the orders placed against them are called delivery orders. GWACs are a cousin to the IT-70 schedule. It is an IT-only government-wide contract that can be issued by GSA, NASA, or NIH. Now, here's the trick. People call lots of stuff GWACs. They're not GWACs. OASIS is not a GWAC. Polaris will be, because that's going to be a replacement for the Alliance Small Business GWAC. Seaport is not a GWAC. So you need to understand that, because if you go looking for a GWAC called, Seaport, you're not going to find it in FPDS. GWACs are government-wide. The difference between these and an IT-70 schedule is that they are competed. All right, GSA schedules are walk-on. You apply for it, you negotiate, hopefully get an award. GWACs, you got to beat up your best friend to get on one of these. Multiple award only vehicles. Now, here's the last one for the IDVs. It's called an IDC, indefinite delivery contract. Most people have never heard of this, but they know it better by one of its three names, and that is IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. But IDIQ has two cousins also, and that's IDDQ, definite quantity, and requirements. So there's three types, and they all account for billions every year. Now, here's the trick. In government contracting, simplified acquisition, or the wide open world of contracting, IDC is the largest contract vehicle used across the board. Like, this total spending of the other four doesn't come close to the dollars spent, and most of those dollars are single award. Throwing it out there. But we have two awards left to talk about, and these are the standalone awards. And that is a definitive contract, which is simply a contract that the government awards to you based on competition or non-competition. It's their choice. And it's not an order placed against the vehicle, it's an order. Purchase order, same deal. It is an order placed by the government with your company. Now, what I want to show you now is the spending and how it breaks down. Because when you take a look at things like BOA spending under simplified acquisitions, it's about $1 billion. That's the red number. If you look at the number underneath it, that's the number spent single award. In other words, not a MAC, not a multiple award vehicle. There weren't 5 people or 10 people at the party. One company got a contract and they're getting the work. BPAs look kind of similar to that. 4.5 billion spent, 2.8 billion of it single award. Now, federal supply schedules and GWACs, no single award there because there's no single award contracts for either of those. But the spending you see on the FSS is literally tied to BPA spending. All right, so it's not really orders against the schedule. Here's the other one, IDC. Now, it's not as dramatic here as it is in the wide open world of contracting, but just check this out, 2.2 billion. So not as much as BPA here, but almost as much single award as BPA. In other words, pretty much every penny spent under an IDC was a single award contract. Now, I've shown you those. I got 2 left to go. Watch the definitive contract. Boom, $4.1 billion. So almost as much as BPA, but all single award. You know, you're not doing any level of task order shootout here. You get the contract, you get the business. Now, the biggest one, the biggest bucket of money on the page is right there. The lowly Rodney Dangerfield purchase order is the biggest mechanism used when the government spends money under simplified acquisitions. People ignore these. Everyone believes POs can't be used for much money. Ask a company called Sunshine Minting out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, about the $9 million, multiple $9 million POs they get almost every year from US Mint. There is no dollar limit on a purchase order. It's based on the acquisition methodology selected. So number one is purchase order. And it's something you need to pay attention to when you're going out looking for work. So here's the deal. Verify how your customer or your buyer is buying what you sell. Confirm which award instruments are being used. If they're using a vehicle you don't have, find a partner. Okay, doesn't mean game over, but if they're using a definitive contract or PO, you're in the hunt. All right, bottom line. For standalone contracts, understand where you need to be in the development of that requirement. All right, you come in too late, you know, if it's running in contracting's hands, you're late to the game. Doesn't mean you don't have a shot. Just means that you have less of a shot because somebody else has already been working that. If it's multiple award contracts, then I would tell you, determine if you don't have them, use your teaming. Understand who to work with to make sure you get a piece of the action. And last, update your market research efforts. All right, here's the next one. This will go pretty quick, and this will be very specific to this group because I'm going to call out some SDVOSB companies here. So do you know who your customers and the buyers are buying from? Very, very simple to find out. You can go into FPDS Easy Search very quickly to get this information. For example, here's a list for FY20 of the top 20 of 136 SDVOSB companies who got awarded simplified acquisition buys by GSA. Not sure if anybody from these organizations is on the call today, but this is what it looks like. Now, I want you to understand, the dollars you're seeing are a cumulative total of everything they got in the fiscal year. So 4.6 million, all right, 3.8 million just from simplified acquisitions. All right, we know the folks at Thundercat, you know, I know Wilson Services. Who else is up there? That's it. And Sky, I think we know SkyQuest Aviation too. But my point is, don't shirk these opportunities. There's real money being spent here, and it takes less work to win. When you look at the PSC codes that GSA awarded under simplified acquisitions, number one is IT products. All right. Number two is maintenance, facilities management. Number three is, and 4 and 5 also are, you know, there's guard services, office furniture. It's literally everything that you would expect an organization like GSA, specifically Public Building Services or FAS, to be buying. And again, this is a simple report. It took me 2 minutes to pull it out and set it up. So when you take a look at what's going on right now, and here's a real interesting one for you. This is the impact of simplified acquisitions. So this is a current snapshot based on FY20 total spending. So $24.7 billion. And of that, the money that went to small business was just under 15 billion. So small business gets most of it. But if you look at the breakdown of set aside, I want you to pay attention. 5.4 billion of what small business won was not set aside. And nearly 5 billion was awarded under a total small business set aside. Socioeconomics are not as prevalent here as they are within the greater government contracting community. So it's small business is what it comes down to. And if you're SDVOSB, first and foremost, you're a small business. To help you understand the greater impact, there were 53,736 small business concerns involved in spending by the U.S. government last year under simplified acquisitions. It looked like this. 8 of the companies booked 50 million or more. The top company took home 523 million. And then on down the list, between 10 and 50 million, 130 companies, 2,300, a million to 10 million, on down the list. You guys are going to get these slides so you can take a look at them. We know companies in almost all these categories because we've been teaching this program and other deeper programs on SAP for over a decade. So we work with a lot of these companies, especially veteran-owned. Last one I'll show you is on this one. And this is when you look at SDV companies. So I did this report based on simplified acquisition when it went to a small business and the company was an SDVOSB. So $2.3 billion government-wide that we can readily identify went to service-enabled veteran-owned companies, but here's the breakdown of set-aside. So a little over 500,000, no set-aside used. The biggest one was in service-disabled veteran-owned small business set-aside, 700,000. And then above that, though, the second biggest one was no set-aside used. So you see how dispersed it is here. So again, veteran companies do well, but how they're getting it to you is all over the map. There were 3,876 veteran-owned companies, service-disabled veteran-owned companies involved in this mix. 11 of them took home 20 million or more. Number one booked 50 million just in simplified acquisition. So remember, this is a $25 billion drop in the bucket of the overall spend, and one company took home 50 million. 20 between 10 and 20 million, almost 500 between a million and 10 million. So this is the kind of activity that's going on. I want to see small businesses across the board, veteran-owned, woman-owned, otherwise, take a bigger chunk of that $25 billion spend, because we're leaving about 10 billion on the table right now. And so I want to see us go for more of that. If you look at the breakdown here for SDVOSBs, these are the top product service codes last fiscal year. So when an SDVOSB company won work under simplified acquisitions, these are the top product service codes being purchased. And again, you guys are getting slides, so you'll be able to go through here and just parse through this and see where you fit. But there's education and training, pharmaceuticals, administrative support, construction, you name it. It's all in there. Right? So keep an eye on that because there are real opportunities. So I got one more piece to show you. And again, from this last section, understanding your competition is. Use FPDS, data bank, your relationships to understand who your competition is. You need to know so you know how to shape your strategy. Global DUNS number when you're searching is the best way so you get the entire company in case there's ever been any M&A activity. Use these queries to understand who your customers are buying from, how they buy, and how much they spend. All right, and also this information will help you as you're developing your pricing intelligence. Lastly, Update your market research efforts. Now, last one for you is this, how much they spend. Now, I've told you already a few times, 25 billion was the mark for FY20, but here's a quick little look back to understand where this all came from. The first 10 years of simplified acquisitions looked like this. So I was selling these actively in 1994. That was my 6th year in the business. So 29.7 billion is a nice number. No part of that would I turn away. But let me help you understand just how much more traction simplified acquisitions have gotten in the last 10 fiscal years. So it is significant. I mean, we've gone from, 14 billion in 2010 to 25 billion in 2019 and 2020. And there's legislation on the books to further increase the thresholds and to increase the utilization of simplified acquisitions. So it's not going away anytime soon. There is no other procurement type in federal contracting today that can boast this type of consistent, enduring growth. Nothing. Schedules, GWACs, nothing. OTAs are literally a pimple on the butt of simplified acquisitions. So I want to help you understand there's a real opportunity here. When you put it all together with everything you're doing, and whether it's the OTAs, SAPs, traditional contracting, there's your big opportunity. But this is the low-hanging fruit that a lot of people walk by every day as they're selling into those bigger opportunities. It has been 11 years of consistent growth for simplified acquisition spending. And again, no signs that it's going to slow down anytime soon. So here's the deal. Don't be fooled by what some see as small dollar amounts. Sabre contracts that the Air Force puts out are simplified acquisitions of base engineering requirements. And for some Air Force bases, a 5-year Sabre contract might be $5 million, like Tyndall, except for the destruction they saw. But like the old McClellan that I used to support, or Edwards, it's a $40, $50 million contract over 5 years, all under simplified acquisitions. Why is that? Because when the government uses a contract vehicle, the threshold is tied to contract actions and not contracts. So everyone says, I don't want a simplified acquisition contract, it's too small. But if the government gives you a 5-year BPA or a 5-year IDIQ where they can place an order with you every day for 5 years for $250,000, think about that for a minute. All right, that's not chump money at all. These opportunities are a foot in the door. I won my first major contract working with the Navy, selling this way to Newark Keyport for 6 months, working with the director of combat engineering years ago, and landed me $1 million contract. I'm an inside sales guy for a Beltway bandit back in these days. Got $1 million contract to basically outfit the first 3 electronic classrooms for the FA-18 when it was a brand new platform for the Navy. All right, the same customers doing the major buys use simplified acquisitions to get the other stuff they need supplemental to the major initiatives. All right, it's the same customers. Get to know them. It's lower risk for you, lower risk for the government. It creates a foot in the door. Again, I've said this, most companies walk by these because they don't know they exist. They don't even recognize them as they're walking to talk to a contracting officer, and that purchasing specialist 2 doors down has got these kinds of opportunities. The other thing is this, whenever you go in Fed Biz Ops now, contract opportunities, all the transactions you're seeing in there, the ones that are not going to reverse auctions, for example, you're going to see the name, address, email address, phone number of the buyer. And you also will know what they're buying. I would track those, put them in your CRM, and then have somebody start calling them. Because anytime those buys are below 25 grand, they're going to look to a small business first. And that might as well be you. Last thing I'm going to say again is, let's update your market research efforts. It's key. Look at it through a different lens, and you'll see better and different results. So the one thing I hope for you guys is coming away from this, is that you're going to take this and be able to go out and win some work. All right, folks, thank you very, very much for having me today. Earl, you still there, sir?
I'm here. Earl's still here too, guy.
Okay,
Thank you
excellent.
so much. We appreciate your time and effort. You're always so very detailed and provide so much great input for this. I think you just touched on it, but let me just ask you, if I see an opportunity of interest with a specific customer, it sounds like I should try to convince that buyer to make a purchase through this way. Is that right? Or?
So actually, the trick is, and contracting, Scott, you know this like I do, contracting officers are creatures of habit and culture. So they're pretty much locked in on what they're going to do. So the advice I give is look at the buyers already doing it. Right? None of us, as far as I know, is a registered lobbyist. So we don't want to go out and like lobby and convince someone to do something that's not part of their portfolio. So the buyers that are already doing it, look at them. If they're not doing it, then talk to them about the other ways you can get to them and that they can get to you.
Great. Okay. And, we see buys in the dollar ranges that you're talking about on the GSA schedule. So why is the number for them so low in your presentation?
Yeah. And so the main thing is it's two different parts of the FAR. So FAR Part 8 is where you find the scheduled programs, both VA and GSA. Simplified acquisitions are in FAR Part 13. And so it's a different type of procurement, different rules, and the schedules can do buys in that range, but they're simplified acquisitions by virtue of the dollar amount, but they're not the simplified acquisitions. It's strictly through the schedules program.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Go-to guy Timberlake, you're always wonderful. It's great to see you again. Thanks for spending time with us today. And again, as I said when we started, thanks so much for your support to small business, and specifically small business associated with veterans and our members at MVSBC. We truly appreciate and honor your commitment to us. And it's always great to see you. Thank you so much for your time today, Guy.
Now, Scott, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Anything I can do to help any company, especially veteran companies. My dad was Army when I was a kid, and I've got plenty of family that's been in and out of the military over the years. So it's the very least I can do in exchange for the service.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Well, we'll see you next time. I'm sure we're going to have you around for a long time. Thanks, guys.
Oh, yeah. I think Earl's got a chain around my ankle, so I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
Thanks to all of you who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. I certainly did. And we'll see you at our next installment of Charlie Mike. Thank you so much. Have a great day.